Hey everyone, Penguin here. I apologize in advance, but for this round of the Alara Block draft, I have to go through my replays. As you'll see later on, something happened which caused me to lose the recording of this match. So, my opponent is playing he's actually using Domain, at least one of each land, although he's primarily focused on, I think, the Denier slash Grixis shards. In terms of the significant rares, he has a Nicobolus, the Planeswalker card, and a Thornling, so I knew that this could potentially be a tough matchup for me. It takes him about 7 minutes for him to show up, but eventually he does. I really thought I was going to get a win through an inactivity. So this hand's fine, gives me a nice curve, and he puts a border post, nothing else. Bring out my Pride Mage and pass. He doesn't do anything his next turn, so my next turn I swing in for 3 and then play out my Ascetic. He goes at the end of his turn for a land. Now his next turn he brings out a Thynax, Sparring Thynax, which I'm fine with, because the next turn I play out my Angelic Benediction. I can tap his Thynax down and swing in for 5. His next turn he swings back for 3 with this Thynax and then passes. My next turn I bring out my Battle Mage and then swing. Actually swing with both, even though theoretically I can swing with my Ascetic for an extra point of damage. I was kind of wary of him having a trick to kill my Ascetic, in which case then I would lose some of my tempo, and this turn I wanted to get in at least some damage in. So I swung in with both my Pride Mage and the Ascetic. Luckily I was able to get in 5 this turn. I passed after that. His next turn he brings out a Rake Claw Gargantuan, which I'm fine with. And I get my 5th land. I figured I can get the win this turn. Just cast Welcome Guide, target my Ascetic, and swing in. And I win this game. For the sideboard, I bring in a Vidalcan Outlander, replacing a Lapse of Certainty, because I noticed that he has quite a few red creatures. So these past few games of this Alara Block, I've been doing alright in terms of getting the mana I need. So it's about time that the Shuffler decides to play a joke, if you will, and give me this hand. And I figured, well, can't take it. I have to start mulliganing now. And you're going to have to, I don't know if you can see if you go back and pause, but basically I end up mulliganing down to 4 because all my other hands, I didn't have enough land to support spells I need. So I get stuck on 4 cards, and I figured, well, if I could win, that would be quite a comeback. Can't do anything. I end up getting stuck here on 1 land. I need either my island so I can start cycling, or a plane so I can cast at least some spell. I finally get my island out, which I'm going to use to cycle my Traumatic Visions. Of course, at this point, he kind of has the advantage, being so far ahead. He plays a Battle Mage. I got out my Pride Mage, and pass. I leave up my island so I could cycle my Glass Dust Coke. He casts a Flesh Former, which I'm not too pleased, because if he gets an island, he could start using its ability and start getting in for quite a bit of damage. So this turn he plays out a Jungle Weaver, and I figured, okay, now I'm really screwed. So I get a Sigil Blessing. Now at this point I could swing in with Pride Mage for 3, and then Sigil Blessing if he decides to block with anything, but I figured, well, then he will swing back for a lot more. And I could have passed and to save it as a trick in case he decides to attack. But instead I decided just to play my Cormorants because I figured I need more creatures out on the board. Okay, he finally gets full domain, and then he starts killing off my creatures. He swings with both. I feel like I could have took one turn from his creatures, but I said I kind of need to stay alive here, and so I decided to double block, which is probably a bit presumptuous of me. Because now he still has 2 creatures, which I'm not fond of seeing. I tapped my mana and then try to cast my Outlander, then decided against it for some reason. I think at this point I pretty much in my head was kind of gave up. He swings for 4, brings out a Thoctor and a Druid, and I figure at this point there's no way I can ever come back, so I concede. To sideboard for the next game, I took out my Vidarkan Outlander since I didn't see much red creatures this game, and one Resounding Wave, and I brought back my Lapse of Certainty and my Excommunicate. So this hand was fine for me, and I just pretty nice curve, and I have answer in case he brings out a creature. Play my Shieldblade out first, pass. He doesn't do anything. My next turn I cast out my Guardians and swing in for 3. And pass. His next turn he casts out Blood Cultist, which I don't think was relevant at the time, and passes. I said it's not worth it to crystallize that, and so I just bring out my Hushblade and swing in for 4. He casts out a Grixis Grimblade, which I feel fine. Now, at this point, I could have crystallized the Grimblade and swung in with 6 with my Hushblade and Shieldblade, but I figured I'll kind of be cautious, so I just swing in with my Shieldblade. And then bring out my Battle Mage, so I could start giving creatures flying if I had to. Now, in his next turn, he casts an interesting card. He brings out a Suicidal Charge, which I realized could give me problems since my guys are kind of weak, and especially since he has a Blood Cultist out, which he could start picking my guys to death and making it get larger. But let's be worried about that. Now, in this instance, I give my Shieldblade flying just so I can have a little evasion. And what I really should have done was bring out both Stormblade and crystallized one of his creatures, probably the Grimblade in this case. Because the problem with the blade cycle I find in this format is that, well, they're nice if you have, of course, the multicolored permanents. If you don't have too many, though, if they end up killing one, then the other ones are sure soon to follow, as you'll see in this instance. So I get a creature flying. He sacks the Suicidal Charge and forces both my guys to attack. Now, if I cast in my multicolored permanents earlier pre-combat, then my Shieldblade would have survived. Because as you can see, he just blocks with my Hushblade with his Grimblade, and then since I have no other multicolored permanents on board, my Shieldblade dies afterwards. And perhaps the greatest mistake I've had this round, what I should have done was cast Crystallization on his creature first, and then bring out the Stormblade, because I just forgot that he still hasn't tapped it to do 1 damage yet. So I bring it out. I realize my mistake, but at this point it's too late. He kills my Battle Mage, and then during his turn he proceeds to kill my Stormblade. So now I'm dealing with a 3/3 Cultist, and now he has a Battle Mage. The main, especially was frustrating, was that if I had cast Crystallization before my Stormblade, I would have a 3/2 flyer. From what I've seen in his deck, he has a little problem doing flyers. If it was still alive this turn, I could have swung in for 4 and get him down to 3. And then 1 or 2 turns later, I would get my Esper Cormorants and swing in for the win. Anyways, he just gets more fixing. And he swings in for this turn. I choose not to block since I figured I could take some damage. He casts Necrogenesis. Nothing too exciting, although it would be annoying that he would get some 1/1s walking around. And I finally, like I said, mentioned before, he get my Esper Cormorants out. Of course, at this point, he could start tapping it, preventing me from doing any damage to him. So yeah, he starts removing my creatures. Next turn, he swings in with the Cultist and 2 Saplings. I block one of the Saplings, I get down to 13. And he brings out Vox Brute, which I take the next opportunity to crystallize, and I bring out my Vox Bodyguard to give me a little boost in life, and give me the opportunity to block his Saplings. He swings again, I take again, and he brings out a Cavern Thoctar. Now at this point, I figured, well, I'm going to be in a bit of trouble unless I draw some relevant cards. Luckily I do. I get my Knight Captain out, which I could use to fog for at least a few turns. Next turn he just swings in with the Thoctar. I take it in this instance because I figured I could take a little more damage. He brings out his Flesh Former and a Thrynax, and I figured at this point, well, if he gets another Plains, then I'm really screwed, because then he could start Flesh Forming and tapping, so I get like no damage through whatsoever, even if I get an extra flyer, which I happen to do. Luckily, Working Guide is a nice card. I give my Vox Bodyguard flying, he taps it, but I'm able to swing in for 4 and get him down to 3. I mean 2. It's at this point that my computer decided to it's had enough for now and shut down on me. So I take the next 7 or 8 minutes to boot it back up and boot back MTGO. Luckily the game's still running. So unfortunately I only have less than 3 minutes. Now, if he had, like I mentioned before, if he had another Plains, he could, during his turn, he could have Flesh Formed to kill my Welcome Guide and just keep tapping down my Cormorants. Luckily, he wasn't, and the next turn I would have swung in with both and kill him. So, due to some lucky top decks, I was able to move on to the next round and win myself at least 1 extra pack. Hopefully I won't make such drastic gameplay mistakes in the future, and you can all join me in for the next round.